Cut it up one time. Getting to know you.
Let's give them something to talk about, babe.
You'll forgive me if I boast. I've now become an expert on the subject I like most.
Let's talk about sex.
All right.
Wanna talk?
And why not?
Hello and welcome to the O Show. I'm your host, Oriana Fox, and we're here today to talk about killer conversations. Now, this is a topic that's very important to me because, although you probably never guess it, I've always been shy. In fact, I'd still describe myself as shy. What's the British expression people used to say to me? Oh yes, you hide your light under a bush. That's what people said to me. I always admired people who could get up on stage and command the attention of a crowd. I always wished I could do that. So you're thinking, she's cured, she's done it, she's made it. She is success personified. And you're wondering, wait, how did she do it? How did she do it? She says she's still shy. I'm confused. How did she do it? That's the question that's in all of your minds right now. And that's what I'm here to answer. Well, it wasn't easy. It hasn't been a cakewalk. And the work isn't over yet. It's ongoing. It's never ending. It's a process. It's a life practice. Yes, I can stand up here in front of you and I can interview my guests and all of that, but let's face it, that's rehearsed. But you can't rehearse. But let's face it, that's all rehearsed. This is a wig and these are shoulder pads. But you can't rehearse real life. I still struggle with conversation and social interaction in everyday life. I struggle with conversation quotidien, if you will. Like that, like when do you slip in that you parlay a little français? More importantly, how do you start up a conversation? How do you finish one? How do you get them to go where you want them to go? How do you handle the awkward pauses and the pregnant ones? And how do you distinguish between the two? It's a minefield. So, to go back to what I was saying at the beginning, my own personal transformation, my radical makeover, if you will, from shy painter to full frontal performance artist, didn't happen in the flick of a switch. I've worked for it, and you're going to work for it too. I want you to get up out of your seats.
Watch me now!
Ready? Okay. Mashed potato. Okay, you're ready. Cha-cha. 1, 2. Okay. You guys can sit down. I'm going to keep going. So, the first thing I did was I acted against my own self-inhibiting, irrational beliefs. I chose to ignore that niggling little voice in the back of my head that said, "You are worthless." And I decided to value myself no matter what. I pushed to one side that other self-destructive mantra. You know the one. You have nothing of any importance to say. And I became someone who speaks her mind. And I became a talk show host. It's worked for me. I know it can work for you. Today's show brings together three wonderful artists. If you haven't heard of them, you should have. They are terrific. They are the fantastic Phoebe Davis, the loquacious Marcia Farquhar, and the flirtatious Brian Lobel. But just to return to my own issues, only for a moment, hopefully it won't take too long. It's my show, I can whine if I want to. I say my issues, but many of you have tuned in for a reason. Perhaps you struggle with conversations of your own, like many people do. Or maybe you're like me and you worry about being seen through or seeming like a phony or an idiot. That's a big one for me. I often find myself pretending to know names I don't know and laughing at jokes I don't get, because I don't want to admit ignorance. And this is interesting because shame, that feeling that you want to go and run and hide in a cave somewhere like a hermit, that feeling that you're not good enough, shame is a negative global assessment. So your totality can be summed up in a word: idiot. Not you said something stupid, but you are a total ignoramus. That's what it is for me. Maybe for you it's, I don't know, outsider, freak, whatever it is for you. Shame, according to certain psychologists, is the opposite of curiosity. It inhibits pleasure and curiosity. So my case makes this clear. Because I'm worried about other people's judgments, I pretend to know things I don't know, and I miss out on opportunities to learn. So at the core of my desire to make today's show and to bring these artists together is to get some guidance that will help all of us to overcome our own personal, particular social anxieties. Now, to that end, I'm asking for a couple of volunteers from the audience to test out the tips that are given out on today's show. But in order for you to self-identify, I thought it best to hear a little bit more about social anxiety, or social phobia, as it's sometimes referred to, from the perspective of an expert. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce the Osho's new staff psychologist. He is the UK's leading expert in rational emotive cognitive behavior therapy. That's RECBT. He has written over 200, yes, that's over 200 books on the subject. He is a University of London Professor Emeritus. That's not just a regular professor. And like my mother, whom you all know as the now former Osho staff psychologist, he has been practicing as a psychotherapist since before I was born, literally. That's one of the important criteria we have here on the Osho when we're looking for a staff psychologist. So please join me in welcoming Wendy Dryden. Could you tell us a little bit about what causes social anxiety?
Well,
wait, can I just finish?
yes.
What causes social anxiety, how it manifests itself, and what do you think is the best way to treat it?
Okay, so social anxiety is about two things. First of all, in common with most anxieties, it's about threat. And then because it's a social anxiety, you have to ask yourself what the person finds threatening. And it is exposure. Exposure of certain aspects of self that one would rather keep hidden, and exposure to a social judgment that one thinks is global and negative, and which one would tend to agree with. So it's about those two components.
Okay, and so how does it, what are some symptoms of, how does it make itself?
Well, I mean, first of all, in order to deal with social anxiety, a lot of people take to vodka or gin or whatever it is, just to make sure that one's sort of anxiety symptoms are quietened down. Because one of the things that people are anxious about is to expose themselves in terms of their anxiety symptoms. Blushing, sweating.
Yeah.
Mind going blank, that kind of thing, you know. So, and so those are the kind of, you know, fears of exposure. Now, we process ourselves when we're socially anxious from the perspective of ourselves, and then we project that, and we predict that the people out there are nasty, horrible evaluators. Not kind, compassionate, empathic, you know, thinking, oh my God, what a brave man this is out here. No, you're supposed to be an expert. You call that an expert? That kind of stuff.
Right.
So,
Okay. And so what's the best way, in your professional opinion, to treat social anxiety?
the best way is one of the most difficult ways, all right? And now this is this. You do have to acknowledge one fundamental truth about yourself, that you are human, as the Rag and Bone Man says. Okay? So don't blame me. Okay. And that human beings will expose their humanity. We sweat. We stammer. Our minds go blank. Okay? So, you know, and so we do have to accept ourselves as fallible human beings. And therefore, and if people out there think, what an idiot he is, there are 2 words to say to yourself that will help you. Oh, 3 actually. They are wrong. I am fallible, and that's what I am exposing about myself. And so if we all had that philosophy, we would wipe out social anxiety at the drop of a hat. But humans being human doesn't quite work like that.
Okay.
Because we believe that we have to show ourselves in a certain light. Suave. Sophisticated. That kind of stuff.
Okay. So to go back, you said that drinking is one of the things people do.
You like that one, do you?
Not me personally.
No, yeah.
But there's another thing.
Well, we avoid. You know, we avoid. We choose not to go to those things. Or if we go to social events, we put on a persona. Hey, what's up, folks? I'm a persona. You know, we put up a persona. So what we're doing there is that we're still hiding ourselves, but we're hiding ourselves under a persona,
Right.
not a bushel. You said bush. It's a bushel. Okay. So never mind. You're human. So that's
Okay, but and is there anything I can do to make my anxiety level worse? Like, what should I avoid?
Oh, if you want to make your anxiety worse, right, you have to understand the nature of anxiety. Anxiety is like a plant. It likes certain conditions to grow and thrive. One of the conditions is what I call the Dalek position. Exterminate. I've got to get rid of my anxiety. I've got to come across as calm and relaxed and socially poised. Okay? So, you know, you've got to get into extermination. You've got to get into, you know, stopping what's going on in here immediately. Of course, anxiety loves that, because every time you try to stop anxiety, it's like that hydra-headed beast. Chop it off, 2 more grow. So, you know, so this mindfulness is actually quite good for anxiety. You know, to let your anxiety be. Doesn't like that. Hates that. Anxiety loves closets, by the way. All right? Go into a closet, you know, and you know, because I've got to hide this negativity about myself, as opposed to, you know, the exposure of one's fallibility, humanity, even though, you know, it might not be pleasant.
Okay. Great. So anxiety loves a closet, and the best thing to do is to
Come out the closet.
come out of the closet. Great. Thank you so much.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
You can
Thank
take
you
a
very
seat.
Thank you.
Who here really identifies identified with some of the things that Wendy was talking about? Show of hands. Great. So who among you is willing to be our little lab rat tonight to test out the advice, the pearls of wisdom from our four expert guests? So who's doing? You, sir. Wonderful. Okay, so tell me, how are you suffering with this problem?
I think right now.
Sorry. I'm sorry. You're very
No, it's
brave
okay.
you're very brave to volunteer.
Thank you. I guess I'm in the job where I always have to meet new people and make good impressions, and it's just so need to find out a kind of method of calming down a bit and like not getting worried if I say the wrong thing.
Okay, that sounds very fitting, and we should definitely be able to help you tonight. Thank you so much for volunteering, but I will tell you when we need you. And so, is there anyone else? We need one more person. Yay! So, tell me, how does your social anxiety express itself, or not, as the case may be?
Well, I definitely tend to mumble up my words, but I'm not sure. That can be also when I get overexcited about something, so it's a combination. But it mostly comes out through my insecurities about my lack of knowledge about whatever
So the
subject
same
might be.
thing
Yeah.
with me, yeah.
I don't know that I should know it, or, it may need to do with art, like, I don't know that artist, or, that kind of, and sort of a lack of kind of your own intelligence, really.
Okay.
Just trying to be happy with what you do know, and the fact that I could spend every evening reading and up about stuff, but actually I'd rather do other stuff.
Okay, great, yeah, okay. So I think we'll definitely be able to help you tonight.
Great.
So you guys just sit tight. But I just wanted to pick up again, reiterate what Wendy was saying about anxiety loving a closet, and the best thing to do is expose your fears. And I think that's what a lot of artists do. And it's those artists that we have here, we bring on as guests, and that's what the O Show is really about. It's about exploring what it means to bring out your fears out in the open, or things that you might think other people would think you should be ashamed of, or things like that. So I would like you and all of you at home, everyone in the studio audience, to join me in reciting the Unconditional Self-Acceptance Pledge. Okay? I am a fallible human being. I have strengths and weaknesses. I'm not perfect. What is perfect anyway? It's inevitable that I make mistakes from time to time. Doing something well is a bonus. I am a unique constellation of qualities, positive, negative, and neutral. I am like the moon. Some parts of me are illuminated, other parts are in shadow. The full moon is always present, yet you can never see it in its entirety. It's impossible to give myself a total rating. I pledge to unconditionally accept myself. I pledge to unconditionally accept others and my life. That's Unconditional Self-Acceptance USA. Unconditional Other and Life Acceptance, that's UOA and ULA. That's Unconditional Self-Acceptance USA. 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 This worked a actually inspired this particular episode of The O Show. Her work includes performances, installations, the creation of social spaces where conversations can take place. So let's bring her on so we can have a conversation. Come on. So, your work centers around engaging different publics in social issues. How do you facilitate those conversations and exchanges?
So firstly, I probably thought it was worth saying that I'm really anxious about this.
Okay.
So I was a bit intimidated by thinking about giving advice to people about this. So I actually don't perform in my work. Right. So
Right.
I don't find that super easy. So I don't perform in my work, but often I work. So I do make performances with other people in them, and I make video work and audio work and print work. And over the last 5 years, I've been working with different groups of people, and as you say, like making or constructing social spaces where maybe conversations happen from that. And there's various different things that I do in my practice to set up those conversations, which maybe that maybe leads to people being able to speak more freely. Some of the conversations that we talk about within one project in particular, Bedfellows, which I'm running with Jenny Moore and Chloe Cooper, looks at sex re-education and how sex education should be lifelong learning. And one of the things we have to be very careful about when we host conversations, we've got a performance in particular that's called Sex Talk Meeting, which is about meeting and talking about sex. And we have to make sure that when we're hosting those meetings, that people feel comfortable, people set their own boundaries, and we make sure we give trigger warnings if we're talking about anything that potentially could trigger people to do with sexual assault. So yeah, we try to put those in place.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you facilitate these conversations, but and are you taking part in them too, or just creating the environment in which these things happen, or the premise in which these things happen?
Sometimes, a bit of both, really. We Sex Talk Meeting in particular, we make a giant bed. So we make a giant bed out of probably about 30 duvets, and we invite people to take their shoes off and come and sit in the bed. We also set the rules of the bed, so that's something that's quite important to talk about. How much people want to share, if they want to stay in conversations or not. We talk about that no one has to stay in bed with anyone they don't want to. So if you don't feel comfortable in that, you can leave. We also wear really great pajamas, like TLC pajamas, and do a dance routine.
You do?
Yeah, we do that to chill everybody out, and we've got a soundtrack just to kind of take the pressure off a bit, I guess.
Okay.
Oh, and maybe one thing that's really important is that with that kind of work, we also really push for training. So when we're working with different places, whether that's like institutions or galleries or like general museums, if they invite us in to do things, we try to make sure that the staff we're working with have been trained around the subjects we're talking about. So it's not just us facilitating these conversations, but the people that are programming it or producing it.
So the dancing and the bed and all these things, do you think they make people at ease, or what else do you do to make people at ease talking about potentially difficult subjects?
Being really honest about there not being set ways to answer things, to present yourself, us being aware that people will come with different histories, so your experiences will be really different to somebody else you're in a conversation with, and making that known means that you potentially are trying to make people feel like they're not being judged with their opinions. It doesn't always happen like that. I think something that I learned there was the fact that none of the spaces that we set up can be safe spaces. We might talk about them as wanting to make them safe spaces, but there's always hierarchies. So potentially you might be in a better position to acknowledge what those hierarchies are and go like, okay, so this is what's going on here, and being transparent about that to then look after the people who are choosing to enter those spaces. It's much as
Okay.
possible.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Just to go back to you and this idea of socially engaged practice, just to let everyone know in case they don't know what that is, socially engaged artists interact with individuals and communities and collaborate with them to address social issues through art. I think how did you train? What kind of training did you do to become that?
When I left art school, I went to art school to do a BA, and when I left art school, I trained as a youth worker. So I used to work as a youth worker and a youth mentor.
So can you tell me a little bit more about your experience or some of the training for being a peer youth mentor? Is that what?
Yeah, of being a youth mentor, my
Yeah.
youth worker training. Okay, one is that that's your job, and you have to be really clear about the boundaries of how you work. Really, you can't be anything else but who you are, so you really have to just acknowledge that, like, you come as you are, which will get different reactions from different people, but what you can't do is, try to maybe be something that you're not, because you think it's going to be...
That goes back to what Wendy was saying about the whole persona thing.
Yeah.
And so with this current project Bedfellows,
Yeah.
can you tell me a bit more about how that project developed? I heard it developed out of a conversation among friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Jenny and Chloe and me have been mates for a while. We were at a party at an artist space, and it was pretty late on at the party, and we started getting really angry because each of us had had a different experience that week around pornography entering our lives without us choosing it to. A couple of days before, I'd been on a date with somebody, and I was sat in a pub, and there was a group of men sat on one of those outside tables just behind the person I was on a date with, and they were passing around a phone that showed a woman bent over, so it was a vagina shot from the back. And so I was doing my best flirting, and then behind the person I was flirting with, there was just a picture of a woman's vagina, or vulva, I should say, sorry, woman's vulva. And I was like, okay, so that's just entered the personal space. And I don't have any say in that. And now I have to pretend that hasn't happened, because obviously the person doesn't know that that's just happened. And so we're talking about this idea of certain types of sexual imagery being so prevalent and being on screens and in public space, and what that means for our generation, what it means for the generation below us as well. So we just started meeting and going to the pub, or meeting before work and having breakfast and sharing our thoughts on kind of consent, desire, feminist porn, progressive sex education. And we're all artists, so we were all coming at it from loads of different angles. With popular culture and art history and strive for political change, I guess. And so we just started meeting and talking about it, and getting emotional about it and getting frustrated. And specifically at this point we were talking about mainstream pornography, and quite quickly we, through our research, moved into looking at queer feminist pornography, which was really great. And from that, I guess that was 3 or 4 years ago, and we started making work publicly about it. So whether that's print work or a series of workshops or live performances or gigs, it's kind of how we're working.
Okay, and so what are some of the outcomes that you were hoping to happen? What kind of conversations were you hoping were going to take place?
Specifically, I grew up in South Wales. I grew up with the idea of what was normal was a straight relationship. What was normal was people's bodies to look the same, and women to behave in a certain way. And what I am keen to do through this project is kind of debunk all of that and look at the we often speak about normativity as a myth, being normal as a myth. We all come at this from different angles, with different bodies and different histories, and that is something that we're really keen to push. So often we're coming at it from a queer, feminist, anti-racist, anti-fascist. We try to say also anti-classist, ableist perspective of how we should learn about sex.
Sounds really good.
Yeah, well, it's also like we're also really aware, like with we're 3 white able-bodied women who have started this research project. So we also we run research groups that happen once a month if anyone wants to come, and we're really keen to like highlight other voices as well as our own, because there's like many other people doing really great work around this, and it shouldn't come from just our mouths, I guess.
Okay. My last question is just like, you said you didn't like the idea of giving advice to shy people, but I think you've come up with some advice there. It was like about, you can only be who you are, self-accept maybe, and come at things from different angles.
Force the institutions you work with to train. Sorry, I'm a big pushing this at the moment.
Oh, to train.
Yeah, so if you work in an institution, and I think big institutions' roles should push training for staff or people that they support and work there. So I think.
Did you say what type of training?
Unconscious bias training.
Unconscious
It's something
bias
that I'm
training.
I've never been on, and I really would like to go on. So if anyone wants to do that, and
Okay,
invite
so
me,
in a
that's
way,
great.
so in a way, like to go back to what Wendy was saying. So we all fear this like highly judgmental other person. So we need to train to be less highly judgmental.
Yeah,
people.
but I would say that what we're fearing is like I would say that I'm going to speak personally. What I'm fearing is this idea of like intellectualized white male in a position of power. Like that is what I grew up knowing as like that is a. Do you know what I mean? Like that was given as an intellectual position. So not only not fear those, but also look at the other options, because it's bullshit. So we got to show other options as well. Like that, we need to get rid of that pretty quick. So like not only go I'm fine, but also go I'm fine because like I should be running this because I should be making space for other people to stand up and run those things because, rather than just like because I think that's maybe where that comes from. I don't know. What do you reckon? I'm looking at Wendy particularly.
I'm a white male.
I know.
I know. That's right. But anyway, so that's mine.
That's great. That's really fantastic. So let's give her a round of applause. That was great. I'm going to be bringing on my second guest, the artist Brian Lobel, whose work I've admired for a very long time because it's seriously funny. And what I mean is, its humor and playfulness doesn't detract from its potent political and social meaning. So let's put our hands together for Brian Lobel. You create intimacy between strangers.
Yeah.
So, how do you make that happen?
I've been curating and making one-to-one performances for a number of years. I've been curating a series of performances called Cruising for Art for coming on 9 years, and there are a few audience members who have been Cruising for Art artists, which is fantastic. They're here. But that was trying to think about one-to-ones in relationship to histories of gay cruising, and thinking about like encounters with strangers that are based on not on signing up and getting a one-to-one performance with an artist because you bought a ticket, but rather like creating spaces where artists and audience members look at each other and then look at each other a little bit more and then decide to maybe do a performance together, empowering the artist to perform for whoever they want, so that as an audience member you actually feel special, that someone wants to perform for you, which I think is something that helps intimacy. If actually it's not someone's obligation to perform for you because you bought a ticket or you arrived, but rather they want to perform for you because you have a haircut they like, or you have the glasses that they like, or they're just feeling that they want to perform for X kind of woman or X kind of man or X kind of, X kind of solicitor who can take them out on a date. I don't know. So I've been doing that for a number of years, trying to think about how queer people have been intimate with each other for a long time and only really in the last 50 years, been doing that with language. So before that, trying to think about intimacy is created through silence. And then myself as a one-to-one performer, I've created a few shows, some of which are better than others. One of which is called Stalled, which I don't know who remembers Shunt, but it was great. Underneath London Bridge was amazing, and I created that performance for a toilet space where I locked myself in the toilet stall with people, asked them if they wanted, I pointed to my arm, and this said protected and this said unprotected, and then they could check mark whichever one they wanted. If they wanted a protected performance, I grabbed into my overalls, dungarees as they say here, pulled out a garbage bag, ripped a hole in the head, and then stuck it over their head. And if they said unprotected, I did nothing. And then I proceeded to have a staring contest with them. And while I had a staring contest with them, I undid my overalls, put my hand into my pants, and started to what looked like masturbating, but I wasn't actually masturbating. I was, in fact, shaking up a bottle of fizzy water, which then I would extravagantly have an orgasm about. If they were protected, they weren't wet. If they were protected, they were wet. And then I went, oh, sorry, and I would leave. So that was a rough intimacy. It was called Stalled, and it was really good. It was about 45 seconds long. I would never be paid to do it, really, ever, but it was very fast and furious, and it has its fans. People remember it. They remember it. And the other show that I do a lot now is called You Have to Forgive Me, You Have to Forgive Me, You Have to Forgive Me, which is pretty much the opposite of the other one, which was 45 seconds. This is an hour long between people, and audience members complete a 92-question survey, which is each of the questions from that Carrie Bradshaw typed on Sex and the City for every episode. So they answer a survey, and then based on that and a consultation with them, I invite them into bed, and then I diagnose them with an episode of Sex and the City that will change their life or answer a question for them, and then we cuddle in bed and watch it. And often we have cosmopolitans, and then at the end I recite the final monologue of Sex and the City. And that is very intimate, because it takes place in a bed, so following on from Phoebe, the bed makes something about intimacy, right? But this is more, it's friendly, in that sex is kind of, it's actually, we don't really talk about sex, we really more talk about kind of problems that people are having in their life, some of which are sexual, some might be related to sex, some might not be. But it's more of the bed as not being a space of sex, but being a space of like kind of quiet reflection and where you feel like most chilled out. So like I think of a day really comfortably as being a day that like I sit on a bed and watch a season of Sex and the City. That's relaxing to me. So it's about sharing that kind of moment with people. I feel like I've talked way too long.
No.
Sorry.
You're almost getting to the point I wanted
Oh,
to get.
almost to the point. Sorry. Intimacy. How do I create it?
Oh, well, no. You were just going to say something about being silent with someone.
Oh, yeah, so we're silent with each other.
Yeah.
If you can believe it. I would never be silent with anyone. We talk for the first 15 minutes.
But what the silence is, you feel is, you said something about it being quite intimate, that silence.
Yeah, it's just the silence of comfort that you sit with a friend silently and watch a TV show. It's very non-phenomenal. It's not a reflective silence. It's not, it's not meditative silence. It's just quiet because you're comfortable.
Yeah.
And that to me is very intimate. I've been in...
It's very intimate.
It's intimate. Sorry?
I agree totally.
There you go.
My mother agrees.
Well, your mother agrees that I'm happy.
Has to be true.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do you prepare for the intimacy that you experience with these strangers? How do you personally prepare?
For me, it's really important to be really present because it's a lot of emotional labor that I'm doing, which is just trying to listen and try to feed back to people. So that's important. So I really just try to be well rested, have enough snacks, have enough cosmopolitans at the ready, knowing when to not drink cosmopolitans because that'll make me tired. Just kind of figuring those things out. But I prepare all of the performances have a frame, and that's really helpful to have a strict frame that starts and finishes it, so that no matter what happens kind of in between, I've got these things to kind of depend on. So I would say that is the most way how I prepare.
So yeah, I mean, is there a difference between the personality you have in everyday life and the personality you show to these people in these intimate exchanges? To go back to the whole idea of personas.
I don't have a persona, or I don't think I do. I think as a performer, I'm the nicest, most patient version of myself. You know, I will give people the time of day, whereas in real life, I might, if annoyed, shut the conversation down and leave the room. You know, but I'm the kind of the nicest, politest version of me. But I think for a while, people were very anxious that Brian LaBelle, the real person, was putting on an act. But I think actually the more I performed in the UK, people realized that I actually never turned on for a performance, that actually this is that and that is this. So it can be kind of exhausting, because maybe my persona is the persona of all time. I don't know, maybe you'll think that that's really unhealthy of me, that I don't have a persona. That maybe I should have a persona to... No, I'm okay? I'm okay. I got a thumbs up. The mother agreed. The psychologist agreed.
They're both psychologists. So
That's good. Okay, good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you never turn on.
Yeah.
And so interacting with these people is just like interacting with a stranger in everyday life. So
Yeah.
Why is it you think that you're like that you're so at ease with that, with the intimacy and talking to strangers? Like, what is it about? Yeah, if we go into like psychoanalytic territory. What about your childhood?
I'm glad that you said childhood. I think I had a very happy mother. And I mean, having a parent that is that can set a good example is one of the great privileges of the world. That actually I think my father is a bit quieter. My mother modeled behavior of being nice to people and greeting people well, and that helps actually. I think about it a lot, because sometimes I do feel weird. I don't have an anxiety when I talk to people. Sometimes I do around certain kinds of men, because of a fear of me being beaten up for being not certain kinds of masculine, or I feel appropriately anxious with my relative privileges in the world, or kind of entering spaces that I feel like maybe I should enter kind of quietly. So I think about those things a lot, but I was modeled behavior of liking people, and I think that I just am that. Is that
Yeah, that's great. So, but
is that a good
I mean, for those of us who didn't have a parent like that, maybe.
Yeah.
So maybe we could find somebody in our social milieu who does that, and maybe we could. It's just a guess here that maybe we could think about, how are they doing that exactly, and maybe they could be a model for me, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's just hard, because I don't think you can teach it. I mean, I don't know. Another thing I was thinking about a little bit today was I grew up in American camps, summer camps. So I kind of consider myself I'm really informed by lesbian performance art and American summer camps are my major artistic influences. And both of those have a very particular relationship with audience. And American camp counseling, summer camps and Jewish summer camps in particular, we're all about the ruach, the spirit. That means spirit in Hebrew. The spirit, the love, the thing, and it feels fake when I say it like this, but it really was. I don't know. Maybe the person that I am. So everyone should go to American summer camp.
Really?
If you have any social anxiety, you should go to American summer camp.
Is there anything that you think is too personal or intimate to reveal in your art?
I create work on what is to me kind of challenging topics. My history with cancer, the death of my first boyfriend, and the Sex and the City show in particular, because I ask audience members a lot of questions about their own life, brings up a lot of challenging issues. So I feel like I deal with a lot of those things. And so I don't think that anything's off limits, but sometimes it's time sensitive. Like, I do think that can be too soon to make a joke about something, or can be just not the right time, because you have to just like look around at the political energy that there and goes, actually, no one needs this harsh satire at this moment about this thing. We're not there yet. My Sex and the City show that I made was particularly in relationship to all of these really rough white men. I don't know, it was maybe like 2 or 3 years ago, all these rough kind of white men were making shows that like, the reviews were like, it will make you feel like you're in the horrible world condition that we're in. And I thought, everyone that I know is in a horrible condition. Like, all of my friends are activists, and they're working on trans issues or anti-war issues, or, like trying to change the disability benefit system. Like, people are exhausted, and I wanted to create, and I thought it would be ridiculous to make a show that would make people feel terrible. I want to bring people into bed, and I want to comfort them, which is why I did that. So it just about, like, for me, that the timing of that work was like, I don't want to say anything about any of these bigger issues now. Maybe I will next year or the year later. But instead, I want to kind of comfort now. That feels like what needs to happen now. But I don't think that there's anything that's too
What about, so you talk about like
personal.
needing time,
Yeah.
but you're someone who's performed all over the world, so are there certain contexts in which that would affect, what you disclose?
Yeah, absolutely. Last year I performed in Nigeria and in Singapore, both countries which homosexuality is illegal. Singapore was interesting because they put a sign outside that said contains connotations of homosexuality, which I thought was amazing. It was like a little warning, and I thought that was charming. For me, I think that as an artist, I want to be listening to other artists that are local to any areas and take my feel off of them. And I was very much invited with the work that I was doing to bring it there. And this was different in Nigeria, where I was told that the context would be too different for me to bring that work. But I told them that I said, well, fine, I'm going to just create a new show, and I'm going to say that this is about the death of my best friend. In consultation with a lot of people, I made that decision, and it was heartbreaking to change that. And fooled absolutely no one. And everyone got what I was talking about, and it opened up many more conversations than I think closed down.
I just want to quickly nip back to something you said a while ago
Yeah.
about, like, if you're annoyed, you'll just, end the conversation. So what are the best ways you find to end something? Just to, go to the killing of conversations rather than just having killer conversations. But how do you kill them?
Well, it's very hard because I'm not great at it. I have a very good friend who we were 2 years ago in South Africa together. And we were in South Africa, in Cape Town, we took a day and we went to the Cape of Good Hope, and there's a little penguin area where the penguins are. And someone started talking to us, and she was so amazing. She just turned and walked away. and I said, that's so...
I've done that.
Yes, I was like, that's so rude. And she was like, Brian, it's penguins. They're so much more interesting than this person who I'll never see again. And she was just like unapologetic. She's like, I'm done having that conversation. So I really have found that really empowering. I don't do that, but I'm better at saying like, oh, I have to, no, I think, what's the best way to end a conversation? My real strategy is I usually end up acting like an idiot. Or I go oh my god, I'm so drunk, or I'm an idiot, and then I can kind of like make me unattractive to have a conversation with. So it almost feels like they're doing themselves a favor by ending the conversation with me. That's usually what I do.
What can you tell us? Like, has anything awkward ever happened in your work? What's the most awkward thing that's happened in your work that you've had, and how did you cope with that awkward situation that arose? Since it's not scripted and anything can happen, I imagine some sticky things happen.
Challenging. The Sex and the City performance is challenging because people bring a lot of themselves to it. The moment you ask people to talk about their own problems, people will take you up on that offer. And when I performed at the Sydney Opera House for their Women's Day festival. And it was a really amazing context because actually it was a really hard day of like really interesting talks and things like that. And the Sex and the City show was like a little bit of light relief to the side. And I brought 6 people to the bed together. And this woman started crying and crying and crying. And I asked her what her question was that she had on her mind. She said, why can't I just get over my ex? She's crying and crying and crying. And you want to honor that crying. And there's part of me that like, I don't have a lot of positive relationships. So I like don't really have a lot of time for that kind of crying. But I want to create space for that and really honor that thing. And the man who was next to her said, my question is, how do I tell my boyfriend that I was sexually assaulted? And they're all sitting there, and I haven't even talked to 4 other people that are here. And I'm trying to make him feel welcomed, trying to honor her crying, which now she probably feels silly about, right? Because she was embarrassed the whole time, and trying to figure out how to do these things. And, Phoebe was talking a little bit about safe space and the impossibility to make safe space, but trying to think about a safer space. Like, how could I make this as comfortable as possible, knowing that really difficult lives are happening here? And that was really just about trying to create a quietness when needed. And of course, people have Cosmos, and they're wearing my old pajamas when we come to bed. But it wasn't, so that is really, it's not awkward. It's challenging. Awkward is like when I've had some awkward ones.
So, but how did you handle that situation? Like, you just created quiet and you just...
Yeah, I thank someone for sharing something which is challenging, making eye contact with other people so that they feel welcome and present, always considering the way I use my hands, in that a touch can be really horrible, but can also be really good, and trying to think about the difference between touching someone with a pinky and holding hands and interlocking hands and cuddling. Like just trying to, and there's no way to do it right. And I'm sure I fucked it up a number of times, but it's just about kind of constantly checking in. Because actually, I think people tell you. Like, actually, people... If you put out your pinky and someone takes your pinky, they're excited to take your pinky. Right? Like, that's okay. And I'm sure there are better experts on these subjects. But trying to figure out what is acceptable, what's not being afraid to push at that also, but, yeah.
I think that segues nicely into just talking a tiny bit more about cruising
Uh-huh.
and the ways in which the performers, how do they signal or how do they approach the participants and how do the participants
Find each other.
like how does it work? And
so it's all based on cruising codes that were in the States. They were bandanas or hankies. Here it was a green carnation or whatever it was. The ways to silently communicate that you were up for sex. So everyone gets a bandana. Usually at the beginning of the night, I kind of ask audience members to take a bandana off of me so that they can get used to the feeling that they will be touched, that one of the performers will touch them if they agree to it. But, sometimes I ask them to take a bandana out of my pants with their teeth. Like something, I kind of like try to play, flirt. You did say I was flirtatious, that is true. So try to play with that. And I tell them, like, you're going to make eye contact. And if they signal with you with their eyes, you can follow them or not follow them. Don't form a line. Don't queue up. They're not interested in honoring a cue. They're going to find who they want to perform for. So for me, it was all about desire, and to feel desired as an audience member, and to feel desired as an artist, and how awesome that can be. But the thing that's also nice about it is because everyone's wearing bandanas, some performers, like if Mamoru Iraguchi is there, who wears, projectors on his head, he's a performer, or just like a really weird Tate Gallery audience member. But he looks like a performer. But if Owen Perry is performing, who usually just wears a t-shirt and jeans, he could be anyone. So kind of queering the idea of who is performing and who is not. Because it also means that audience members will often cruise each other, thinking that they are other performers, and then they're kind of waiting to go, did it start yet? Is this it? Is it? And then they have an awkward giggle, and then they talk to each other, and couples have met at Cruising for Art, so that we're not people. And I think that kind of excitement hopefully means that we're all performing all the time, and we're all audiences all the time. So
couples have met. What else? What other kinds of outcomes?
There's been a lot of outcomes, depending on the galleries that we've been in. Lots of outcomes, lots of different outcomes. Yeah, lots of outcomes.
Okay.
Cruising was always, historically, was both kind of sexy or erotic or sexual. It was also really dangerous, incredibly dangerous, incredibly disrespectful in many cases. So we try to bring a range of experiences for artists to have, and some of them are really playful and really fun. Some are really explicit. Some of them are, it's always been, all of the amazing artists have brought all their amazing practice, and it just tries to be different metaphors for what kinds of interactions people can have, from the really friendly to the really awkward and to the really kind of sad.
So my last question for you is, what is your advice for shy people? What would you say to them to help them in their interactions with people, starting up conversations and things like that?
So my advice for shy people comes from my history of performing around cancer, which I had many years ago. And I used to do all these performances about cancer, and at the end, at the Q&A afterwards, people would raise their hand and they would instantly start crying, and they would start talking about their mother or their father or their friend or something that had died. And also I realized that in the Q&A questions, very few were ever about me. They were all about other people, their own lives. And maybe it wasn't because I wasn't a very good performer when I was 20, 23, 24. But I also thought that actually performance is just a conduit for people to experience themselves. So that is really helpful for me, for shy people. And the reason why is because I say it's actually not about you. No one is evaluating you. They're just trying to be their fullest self through you. And I don't mean that everyone is that selfish, but rather we go to art because we care about how that art affects us. And we talk to people because we want to know what they can teach us about ourselves and the world, and how we can talk to them. It's more interrelated. So my advice to shy people is understand that people are having their own relationship with you. And they're not evaluating you. It is just about how they can be themselves in front of you. And I think that takes pressure off you to feel like you're on top of your game all the time. Is that good advice?
That's great. Yeah, I love it.
There you go.
Thank you so much for
My
being on the
pleasure.
show. Join us after the break, when we'll be talking to Marcia Farquhar, and also we'll be hearing from our volunteers. So stay with us.